Career mentoring in
So, as
online
Edith said, my name
communities,
is
seeking
Jacques.
and
I am
receiving advice from an
researcher at the
online
University of
community.
Cambridge,
Please join
and this
me
work is
in
on
welcoming
crowdworker
Mary.
economics in the gig economy. So this work focuses on US-based Amazon Mechanical Turk crowd workers. So for people unfamiliar, this is Amazon Mechanical Turk. Essentially, it is an online job board where people known as requesters can post web-based tasks, and people known as workers can work on those tasks for a small fee.
And today I'm going to present you our study.
This is a basic example of a Mechanical Turk task, but the important feature here I want to draw your attention to is the price paid for these tasks. So this task has a maximum time allowance of approximately 20 minutes and a payment of 40 cents. So while we typically wouldn't expect the worker to take a full 20 minutes on a task, in the worst case scenario they might do so, and so that would equate to a wage of $1.20 per hour. When you think about crowdsourcing in the broader gig economy, tasks like fast food delivery, general administrative tasks or freelance consultancy work, those kinds of wages are fairly unattractive.
On the side of the benefits, people experience career
So now we've
growth,
placed
career growth,
crowdsourcing in the broader gig economy. I want to think about economic
However,
measures. So on an individual level, you might think about your employment status, whether or not you have a job, and your income level, or if you're from a poor member of society, your level of destitution. And at a national level, we think about unemployment rates and poverty rates.
It may have its own consequences. So research suggests that
I want to take a moment to touch on some related work. So on the left we have the demographics and dynamics of Mechanical Turk workers by Tavala et al. This was published in February of last year. Their survey included a question on household income, and here you can see they plotted it against the national income figures for the United States. This work was carried out as a 28-month survey, so the official figures are produced on an annualised basis, so it's slightly unclear which year they're comparing to here. And additionally, as the survey was carried out on a rolling basis over those 28 months, you can't extract trend analysis from that data. Additionally, I want to mention the International Labour Organisation report, Digital Labour Platforms and the Future of Work. This was published in September of last year. And they looked at, among other things, what other types of work US-based Mechanical Turk crowd workers was carrying out, and between 2015 and 2017 they indicated that people were spending less time doing other types of tasks by a marginal amount. However, this survey was based on only 200 Mechanical Turk responses in 2017 from US-based workers, so it's a fairly small sample. So just to detail how we collected our data and what we collected, we actually carried out 4 large-scale surveys with approximately 3,000 US participants in each. We took a year-on-year approach, so we picked a fixed point in the year, and subsequent surveys were done during the same period in subsequent surveys. And we tried to collect data that was going to be comparable to the national statistics.
His supervisor is trying to get credit for
our
the
first
work
survey was
that
carried
he has
out in
been doing.
2012-2013.
He cannot
In
go
it,
and
we asked just 6
for help his
questions.
supervisor,
We asked the age, the
obviously
gender,
conflict of
the level of
interest,
education,
or
the
his
household
peers, his
income,
colleagues,
how much
because
time
this
the
may
worker spent on
threaten his
Mechanical Turk,
job.
and additionally we
So
tried
what
to
does he
understand
do?
their
He
employment
goes
status.
online.
And to do that, we used the following question.
Interestingly enough,
Excluding time on
you do
Mechanical
not know
Turk,
what
in any
kind
one
of
of the last
career
4
advice
weeks, have you carried out 15 or more hours of paid
even
work,
closed
including
doors,
self-employed
because
work?
you don't have access to this data.
Now, this seems like quite a wordy question
by
to
going
ask, do you have a
online
job?
and posting your
But
question,
understanding
online,
an
it gives us a
individual's
unique
employment status
opportunity
is
to
actually fairly
study
complicated.
What kind of career advice requests
I just wanted to show you this
do
quote
people
from the
make
Bureau of
in
Labour
an online
Statistics,
community?
who produce
And that
the
leads
official
us to the
statistics in the United
question.
States. And they say
And then
the
you
respondents are
have
never
a
asked
number of,
specifically if they are unemployed,
strangers
nor are they
with
given the
a similar
opportunity to
professional
decide their own labour
expertise
force
that
status.
they actually,
Many of them may not be sure of their
give you
active
some
classification
suggestions and
when the interview is
some
completed.
advice of how you can deal
So
with
the
the
reason for
problem.
this is that the official survey
So,
contains over
and
200
that
questions to
leads
determine
us to
someone's
the
employment
next
status,
research
and we have
question
tried
about the dynamics
to
of mental
condense this down to the
decline.
single question
So
you've just
two
seen.
different kinds of requests elicit different types of
However,
response.
in our subsequent survey, for the 2013-14 survey,
and not only
we did
this,
revise that question slightly, and in fact we
oftentimes
removed
you
the
have
requirement for 15 or more hours of paid work, and the reason for this is that
probably similar
the
problems,
15 or more
and
hours
try to figure out
requirement
the
is only
wrong
actually applicable to a
solution.
small subset
So
of
by
the
going
overall workforce,
online
and we
and
thought it
seeing
was
what
better
other
to
people
err on the side of
question and
employed rather
answer,
than unemployed,
you
as this
may
was, as I say, a
benefit
small
and learn
subset of the
from
population.
that. So
For our 2016-2017 survey, we added one additional question. As I mentioned, we were interested in the poverty rates, and so poverty is a function not only of your household income, but also of how many people are dependent on that income. So to better make these estimates, we included a question explicitly asking how many people were in that household. Finally, for our 2017-2018 survey, we were actually content with the previous survey and so made no additional changes. This survey is therefore directly comparable to the previous survey. So what do our results mean for the employment status and relative poverty of our respondents? Well, if I start with the unemployment rate, as you can see, the unemployment rate here for the respondents was actually far higher than the nationally reported figures. So our respondents indicated between 40 and over time going down to 30% unemployment rate, and this compares to 7.8 to 4.1 in the national figures. So this is a 5 to 7 times multiple. While this does seem quite high, it's important to additionally note that if you trace individual workers through our multiple surveys, you can see that in general those workers report an unemployment rate decreasing at a faster rate than the national figures. Further, I wanted to mention the amount of time the workers spend on Mechanical Turk, and between our 2012 and 2017 results, you can see there's a general trend upwards in the amount of time undertaken on the platform. However, by our last survey, there's, the number of hours committed to the platform seems to have reduced, and this might indicate the reversal of that kind of trend. Additionally, I wanted to mention the 30-hour category here in particular. Now, so between 7.1 and 9.5% of our respondents indicated working at least 30 hours per week on the platform. This is important because under the Affordable Care Act in the United States, which is commonly known as Obamacare, anyone who is working at least 30 hours per week would be considered full-time employed, and subsequently they may be entitled to employer-subsidised health care, and of course that's particularly important in countries like the US that don't have nationalised health services. If I can move on to our poverty figures now, if I start with household income, you can see here that household income brackets have improved over the period of our surveys. This is highlighted by, in our first survey, approximately 70% of respondents indicated a household income of below $60,000 US. However, by 2017-2018, that figure is closer to 50%. So these are definite positive shifts. However, it's important to note that compared with the national statistics, this improvement lags that performance. So people who are respondents indicate moving to higher income brackets at a slower rate than nationally. To estimate the poverty of our respondents, we have to use the official poverty thresholds produced by the United States Census Bureau. This chart shows the 2017 figures. They change annually. And as I mentioned, the more people in a household, the higher that threshold will be. If I take an example of a four-person household with an income indicated of less than $20,000, I can look at these figures and see that that's definitely below $25,000. So I can say with certainty that this particular group would be below the poverty threshold. For a smaller household of just two members, still indicating below $20,000 US, the poverty threshold is actually $15,877, so just below $16,000. And because of the fact that this household would have indicated below $20,000, it's not possible to determine with certainty whether or not this particular household would be in poverty. At a population level, however, the US Census Bureau also provides income distribution figures. So this tells us how many people are earning or bring in income in certain levels. If we consider all household respondents that had two members and had an income of $20,000, if we look at where the threshold is at $16,000, we can see that approximately 75% of these households would be considered in poverty. If we then go on to consider these figures in aggregate with the rest of our survey respondents, we're able to see that over the period of our surveys, our estimated poverty levels have reduced. Significantly, though, in our first two surveys, estimated poverty rates were above the national figures, but however, by the 2017-2018 results, they were significantly below the national figures. So that's a definite positive trend for our respondents. So what do all these results mean in the broader context of crowd work in the gig economy? Well, as we've seen, our workers have increasingly undertaken alternative types of work. Further, they've reduced their time commitments, recently at least, to using Mechanical Turk. And this is true not just in aggregate, but if you trace individual participants through our multiple surveys, you can see that they individually report spending less time on the platform. We've seen positive shifts with regard to household income, although again, as I mentioned, this lags the national performance. And further, we've seen a reduction in poverty levels. Thinking about how these results impact the research community and researchers, going forward, we might expect to see a reduced US worker pool. So if workers have other opportunities outside crowd working, they may choose to pursue those instead. And this might be hinted at by Amazon's reversal of their long-standing policy where they were preventing foreign nationals, non-US nationals, from signing up to become workers on Mechanical Turk. And again, they've now permitted international workers to sign up as well, which bolsters the global population of workers, but doesn't necessarily fix the issue if you're looking specifically for US workers. We might also see more unpredictable availability. So if workers are spending less time on the platform, even if the worker population remains stable, those workers may not be available to carry out our individual tasks. This might be particularly important for researchers who maintain curated lists of participants or use the built-in qualification system that lets you grant a qualification to a user and then filter back those users to participate in subsequent surveys or tasks. Additionally, we might begin to see more discerning workers. If workers have alternative opportunities, they might choose to do those instead of tasks that they find more challenging or more difficult. And of course, they might feel less compelled to do so if they're no longer quite so dependent on their income. And finally, we might begin to see requests for higher payments or a requirement for higher payments for these workers. So if workers are able to demonstrate a higher value to their time and have sufficient income, they may be less likely to undertake tasks at lower pay. They may choose to invest that time in alternative activities such as leisure or higher paying work opportunities. So these is just a few summary points that I mentioned on the previous two slides. One of the things I wanted to mention is that the complete data set in an anonymised form is available for this work. So if you don't agree with our trends analysis, or you would like to trace individual workers through the various surveys and look at other various pieces of various changes over time, that's all going to be available. Unfortunately, the projector is clipping the QR code. So thank you very much for your time.
Okay, questions? We're going to pass around the microphone to whoever has a question, so just raise your hands if you have a question.
Hi. This is a very practical question. It's just like, how much do you recommend paying? Like, I know the old kind of like guidelines were try to hit minimum wage or a little bit higher than that. What do you think it is around now? So I intentionally avoid making a recommendation explicitly in this because I think it depends very much on what task you're asking people to do and also where in the world they are, of course. So minimum wage in the US is different from the minimum wage in India, which is the other large demographic. I'm not particularly comfortable with the idea of the reservation wages that you see published in a lot of related research, which talks about $1 to $2 per hour. I personally feel it should be higher than that, but I think it is a definite challenge because of the international nature of the platform to provide sort of a particular figure. I hope that helps.
With the reduced use of Mechanical Turk, do you have any insight in whether or not there's an increase in usage of other services?
And actually, that's not something I've looked at, to be honest. We primarily use Mechanical Turk partly because it is it has historically been the major platform. So.
Thanks for the talk. It was great. I was wondering, do you have any suggestions on how to kind of get around in the future the issues of like a reduced U.S. worker pool and the unpredictable availability? If, like, for instance, you're doing things where you need qualifications on workers, that's even going to reduce the pool even further. I was just wondering if you had insights into that.
Well, I think that's sort of a two-pronged solution. I think the higher pay that you can offer on your own task is one thing. However, for that to be effective, really, to maintain a worker pool, that would have to be done across the board to, bolster availability. But I think the unfortunate reality is if you need a particular curated worker pool, then you're just going to have to ensure that it's sufficiently large, or you're going to have to be willing to wait slightly longer for your results going forward if you need those.
So you mentioned like increase household income, reduce poverty level, and then you also mentioned that people spend less time on the platforms now. So is it possible that there's some form of skill acquisition which they then go on to use in other forms of work which is not on Mechanical Turk?
Well, that's certainly how I see what's happening. I would suggest that 5 years ago there wasn't the same availability of sort of gig economy jobs that had low skill requirements, but now you can choose to pick up or drop, say, pizza delivery at leisure, and there are other alternatives as well. And so I think people are more willing to do those kind of tasks, and that may be why there's a shift.
And because one of the things with crowd work is people tend to enjoy work which is more creative and not boring, like simple tasks. So that has a skill acquisition thing in the task itself. So that might be one of the reasons. Yes.